Alright, this one's gonna be good, I'm sure. It has to be. It's called Chapter 8, General Jinjur's Army of Revolt. Tip was so anxious to rejoin his man Jack and the sawhorse that he walked the full half the distance to the Emerald City without stopping to rest. Then he discovered that he was hungry. A full half a distance. Isn't that just half the distance? This is a real book. Then he discovered that he was hungry and the crackers and cheese he had provided for the journey had all been eaten. While wondering what he should do in this emergency, the emergency being he walked to a city which would have food in it, he came upon a girl sitting by the roadside. Why doesn't he meet up with the scarecrow and all those people? Alright, so he meets this girl, whatever. She wore a costume that struck the boy as being remarkably brilliant. Let's see if we agree. Her silken waist being of emerald green and her skirt of 4 distinct colors, blue in front, yellow on the left side, red on the back, and purple on the right side. Fastening the waist in front were 4 buttons, a top one blue, the next yellow, a third red, and the last purple. The splendor of the dress was almost barbaric. That doesn't make any sense. So Tip was fully justified in staring at the gown for some moments before his eyes were attracted by the pretty face above it. I mean, a bit awkward. Yes, the face was pretty enough, he decided, but it wore an expression of discontent coupled to a shade of defiancy or audacity. When the boy stared, the girl looked up at him calmly. The lunch basket stood beside her, and she held a dainty sandwich in one hand and a hard-boiled egg in the other, eating with an evident appetite that aroused Tip's sympathy. Tip's sympathy. He was just about to ask a share of the luncheon when the girl stood up and brushed the crumbs from her lap. "There," she said, "it is time for me to go. Carry that basket for me and help yourself to its contents if you're hungry." Tip seized the basket eagerly and began to eat. So much for me saying something exciting would happen this chapter. He's gonna eat an egg. He's gonna eat an egg. Alright, he eats the food, following for a time the strange girl without bothering to ask questions. She walked along him with swift strides, like Taylor, and there was an air of decision and importance that led him to suspect that she was of some great personage. Finally, when he had satisfied his hunger, he ran up beside her and tried to keep pace with her footsteps. A very difficult feat, for she was much taller than he, and evidently in a hurry. "Oh, thank you very much for the sandwiches," said Tip as he trotted along. "May I ask your name?" "I'm General Jinjur," was the brief reply. "Oh," said the boy, surprised. Surprised that she had a name? Or maybe that she was a general, wearing a gown, or a gingham, or whatever that was. A skirt, it's called. Okay. Yeah, we're learning fashion. "Ooh," said the boy, surprised. "What sort of general?" "I command the army of Revolt in this war," answered the general with unnecessary sharpness. "Oh," he exclaimed again. "I didn't know there was a war." Yeah, it's news to me too. We could have built a little tension in the story. So far, it should be called Tip Eats an Egg. "You weren't supposed to know it," she returned, "for we've kept it a secret." "Well, not anymore, Jinjur. And considering that our army is composed entirely of girls," she added with some pride, "it is a surely remarkable thing that our revolt is not discovered yet." "It is indeed," acknowledged Tip. "But where's your army?" "About a mile from here," said General Jinjur. "The forces have assembled from all parts of the land of Oz at my express command. For this day we are about to conquer His Majesty the Scarecrow and wrest him from the throne. The army of Revolt only awaits my coming to march on the Emerald City. Normally I'd be like, oh no. But she has got to be a better ruler than the Scarecrow. I mean, I'm not mad. She can boil an egg. Well, said Tip, drawing a long breath, this is certainly a surprising thing. May I ask why you wore the Rushmish? He said. May I ask why you wish to conquer His Majesty the Scarecrow? Because the Emerald City was ruled by men for long enough. For one reason, said the girl. Moreover, the city glitters with beautiful gems, which might be far better used for rings, bracelets, and necklaces. Clearly, Alfringbaum has done absolutely no research, as per usual, into writing from a woman's perspective. And there is enough money in the king's treasury to buy every girl in the army a dozen new gowns. So we intend to conquer the Emerald City and run the government to suit ourselves. I guess having gowns is better than whatever the Scarecrow's doing with the money. Jinjur spoke these words with an eagerness and decision that proved she was in earnest. Oh, I'm sure she is. That was not in doubt. But war is a terrible thing, said Tip thoughtfully. This war will be pleasant, replied the girl cheerfully. She may not understand war, having not fought in one yet. I take back what I said about her ruling. Many of you will be slain, continued the boy in an odd voice. Odd, A-W-E-D voice. Also, the voice I'm doing, I guess, makes it kind of odd. Who? That is insulting? Dear narrator, please don't say that about my voice. All right. Oh, no, said Jinjur. What man would dare oppose a girl or dare to harm her? And there's not an ugly face in my entire army. Tip laughed, which is kind of rude. Perhaps you are right, he said. But the guardian of the gate, whom I call Bill Gates, is considered a faithful guardian, and the king's army will not let the city be conquered without a struggle. The army is old and feeble, replied General Jinjur scornfully. His strength has been used to grow whiskers. That's not how whiskers work. There's really very little work, to be honest, to grow out your mustache. In fact, you do nothing. When the wonderful lizard reigned, the soldier with the green whiskers was very good royal army for people who feared the lizard. But no one is afraid of the Scarecrow. That's true. So his royal army don't count for much in this time of war. After this conversation, they proceeded some distance in silence, and before long reaching a clearing in the forest where fully 400 young women were assembled. These were laughing and talking together as gaily as if they had gathered for a picnic instead of a war of conquest. They were divided into 4 companies, and Tip noticed that they were all dressed in similar costumes to the one worn by General Jinjur. The real difference was that while most girls from the Munchkin country had a blue stripe in front of their skirts, those from the country of the Quadlings had a red stripe in front, and those from the country of the Winkies had a yellow stripe up front. And the Gilligan girls wore the purple stripe in the front. All had green waists. Probably their clothes, not just their waists, I'm assuming. Representing the Emerald City they intended to conquer, and the top button of each waist indicated by its color which country the wearer came from. The uniforms were jaunty and becoming, and quite effective when massed together. Effective how? In being colorful? Tip thought this strange army bore no weapons, whatever. But in this he was wrong. For each girl had stuck through the knot of her back hair 2 long, glittering knitting needles. Has our author met a woman? General Jinjur immediately mounted the stump of a tree and addressed her army. "Friends, fellow citizens, and girls," she said, "we are about to begin our great revolt against the men of Oz. We march to conquer the Emerald City, to dethrone the Scarecrow, and to acquire thousands of gorgeous gems, to rifle the royal treasury, and to obtain power over our former oppressors." "Hooray!" said those who had listened. Which is an awkward way of saying not everyone listened. But Tip thought most of the army was too engaged in chattering to pay attention to the words of the general. The command to march was given, now, and the girls formed themselves into 4 bands, or companies. I thought we said that already. And set off with eager strides toward the Emerald City. The boy followed after them, carrying several baskets and wraps and packages, which various members of the army of revolt had placed in his care. Odd that they'd assume he was on their side, which maybe he is. It was not long before they came to the green granite walls of the city and halted before the gateway. The guardian of the gate at once came out and looked at them curiously, as if a circus had come to town. He carried a bunch of keys swung around in his neck. He carried a bunch of keys swung around his neck. He carried a bunch of keys swung around his neck by a golden chain. His hands were thrust carelessly into his pockets, and he seemed to have no idea at all that the city was threatened by rebels. Speaking pleasantly to the girls, he said, "Good morning, my dears. What can I do for you?" "Surrender instantly," answered General Jinjur, standing before him and frowning as terribly as her pretty face would allow her to. "Surrender," echoed the man, astonished. "Why, it's impossible. It's against the law. I've never heard of such a thing in my life." "Still, you must surrender," exclaimed the general fiercely. "We are revolting." "You don't look it," said the guardian, gazing from one to the other admiringly. "But we are," cried Jinjur, stamping her foot impatiently. "And we mean to conquer the Emerald City." "Good gracious," returned the surprised guardian of the gates. "What a nonsensical idea. Go home to your mothers, my good girls, and milk the cows and bake the bread. Don't you know it's a dangerous thing to conquer a city?" "We are not afraid," responded the general, and she looked so determined that it made the guardian uneasy. So he rang a bell. That's what you do, right? He rang a bell for the soldier with the green whiskers, and the next minute he was sorry he had done so. For immediately he was surrounded by a crowd of girls who drew the knitting needles from their hair and began jabbing them at the guardian with sharp points dangerously near his fat cheeks and blinding eyes. It's not a caricature of women whatsoever. The poor man howled loudly for mercy and made no resistance when Jinjur drew the bunch of keys from around his neck. Followed by her army, the general now rushed to the gateway, where she was confronted by the Royal Army of Oz. I didn't know there was a Royal Army of Oz. She was confronted by the Royal Army of Oz, which was another name for the soldier with the green whiskers. Of course it is. "Halt!" he cried, and pointed his long, full gun in the face of the leader. Some of the girls screamed and ran back, but General Jinjur bravely stood her ground and said reproachfully, "Wait, how now? Would you shoot a poor, defenseless girl?" "Nope," replied the soldier, "for my gun isn't loaded." "Not loaded?" "Nope, for the fear of accidents. And I've forgotten where I hid the powder and shot to load with it. But if you'll wait a short time, I'll try to hunt them up." "Don't trouble yourself," said Jinjur cheerfully. Then she turned to the army and cried, "Girls, the gun isn't loaded." "Hooray!" shrieked the rebels, delighted with the news. And they proceeded to rush upon the soldier with the green whiskers in such a crowd that it was a wonder they didn't stick the knitting needles into one another. But the Royal Army of Oz, this one dude, was too afraid of the women to meet the onslaught. Fair enough. He simply turned and ran with all his might through the gate toward the palace, where General Jinjur and her mob flocked into the unprotected city. And in this way was the Emerald City captured, without a drop of blood being spilled. The army of Revolt had become an army of conquerors. I guess the question that faces us, are we worried or are we relieved at this turn of events? Next chapter is going to be called The Scarecrow Plans an Escape.